Hello folks and welcome to the weekend warm-up from here at the Bahrain International Circuit. 3 races to go in 2020 and we start right here, Lawrence, and it is great to be back in Bahrain, great to be back in the heat. And a lot of the drivers saying it's actually going to be great to be back at a circuit that hasn't been freshly resurfaced. Yes, it's just nice to be at somewhere familiar, I guess. This paddock's lovely. You'll see as we walk down it's very well lit up. The circuit is familiar to all of the teams. The weather, as you said, is hot, so the conditions all weekend should be something that the drivers and the teams expect. And I suppose from that point of view, when you're looking for consistency, that's the best you can get. Yeah, absolutely. We are, of course, here for 2 races in a row. Next week's race will be on the outer ring. Didn't really talk to anybody about that today because it's
we can do that next week.
Not pertinent to this weekend's action at all. So we're going to go through and talk about everybody. I suppose we have to talk about your shoes first, don't we?
Well,
last week you were rocking the Wookiee look, and this week, what's the theme? Is it just a W every weekend?
I just wanted to brighten the place up because I didn't feel like there was enough fairy lights here.
Twinkly lights. It's quite Christmassy.
Thought we'll just add a little bit more sparkle to the paddock.
Lovely.
Your favourites, right?
My favourites. Williams for this weekend. George Russell sitting up there. Hello, George. Of course, still wanting that first point of the 2020 season, and honestly, they've deserved it at points. I didn't come together for them last time out. Nicholas Latifi spinning out of the race. But yeah, I mean, do we think that they have that shot at a point in these final 3?
I think that if the circumstances are such, yeah, I think they can get that point because we've seen so many times this year, particularly with George, he's been on the fringes and it just hasn't worked out for one reason or another. You
say particularly with George. I think Nicholas has been equally impressive in race. Well, maybe not equally, but at times he has been impressive in the races themselves. I think he's shown a decent consistency. He's been close as well. He's finished a couple of races in 11th place. He comes back here to a track that he knows well. He won, of course, in Formula 2 here last year. I think Nicholas is being overlooked a little bit.
I think it's in qualifying where Nicholas is really struggling.
Yes, and he really has, yeah.
And I think he admits that, and that's what puts him on the back foot on race day, because by then George is probably a couple of places up on him already in the prime spot for the team's best strategy. Yeah. So it's just made life much harder for him to start with. And, you know, if he is strong in the races, if he can just get qualifying sorted, maybe he will be the first one to get some points.
What were the guys talking about today in the print presser?
So for these guys, it was a mix of kind of trying to not get too far ahead of themselves. They know that they're still racing the Hasses, the Alfa Romeos. They want to look a little bit more to next year because even though there isn't much change on the cars, they feel that these guys have made a step on. They're still bringing new parts to the car, George said. And he feels like if they can use these 3 races to give them that kind of catapult into next year, maybe we'll be talking about the fact that they won't just be on the fringes of points, but more consistently even challenging for that 9th or 10th.
That is the hope. The hope down here at Haas is that we might have some news over who's going to be driving for them next year, but that's not forthcoming yet.
We're still waiting, aren't we?
Yep.
They're playing the waiting game. I liked it to start with. I'm liking it less and less as it goes on.
It's going to be one of those situations, isn't it, where everybody knows what the news is, and when they finally announce it, it'll just be like, you could have told us that 6 weeks ago when we knew it.
With all these things, it's difficult. There's T's to crosses, I's to dot, and I imagine that everyone needs to be happy with the timing of the announcement, and everyone's happy with it. So I can see that we'll find out, I would have thought, before the end of the season.
I can't believe you nearly tripped over there with your path being illuminated in multiple colours. Yes, but while we are still trying to work out who will be driving there is also the question of where those 2 will be driving today. Reports in the American media saying that K-Mag signed for Ganassi to go and race at IMSA. K-Mag saying it's not done yet.
Very coy, wasn't he, with his answers? It almost made me think it probably is.
Has been signed, yeah. And which I think would be great, getting him in front of the US audience, getting him in a Ganassi as well. And he was saying, obviously, that had come about because he'd gone to all of the IndyCar teams and said, have you got space? And Chip had said, well, not in the IndyCar team, but actually for IMSA, there's potential for you there. So.
He's still clearly hungry, isn't he, to keep racing?
Oh, and goodness, yes.
He was asked today about his aggressive driving style, and Marcus Ericsson apparently said that style would suit over in America.
Massively.
So it's just, I think it's come a little bit too late for Kevin to be looking for those kind of things, but it bodes well for the future.
Also, you put him in that car alongside the likes of a Scott Dixon. If he proves himself there, as you say, he's a hustler. He'd be great in IndyCar. I'd love to see Kevin there. Alfa Romeo, we've walked past them without saying too much. Kimi, 8 podiums here, goes well at this track.
Yes, he really likes this place. I asked him about that today and he couldn't really answer why he goes well here. But he just likes the place. And Alfa Romeo aren't as strong as they were last time here, and he had a good result when he was here. Lower ends of the top 10 points. I'm not sure they'll be able to do that here again. But the way that he's driving and the way that they've been upgrading the car, I think they are kind of an outside bet for that kind of smaller ends of the points.
Okay. Racing Point. Let's take a second to stop outside here, because they had a fantastic Turkish Grand Prix. Of course, we arrived there. The battle for third place in the Constructors' Championship was incredibly tight. With their podium, though, they've started to stretch things out a little bit, and they both looked brilliant. But in particular, let's talk about Lance, that pole position. Is that enough to stop the doubters, stop the naysayers?
I think it's a start, for sure. I think he did enough that weekend, even though the final result wasn't there, to show that he deserves his place in Formula One. The key now, obviously, is to build on that performance, to try and keep his chin up, because he hasn't really had the best of it this year. And if he can kind of deliver a few results at the end of this season, maybe we'll get into next season, we won't be talking as much about it.
I like your positivity. Perez, though, was once again outstanding, having been denied that podium by a bit of a strategic blunder in Imola. Absolutely phenomenal to see him back on the podium. And I think, honestly, he's having his best season in Formula One. You take those 2 races that he had to take off for COVID, you take away the problems in the early races, and he's still 1 point off scoring the most points he's ever scored in a World Championship season, and all of that in the shortest season that he's ever contested in Formula One. He's doing a phenomenal job and is yet without a seat for next year.
It's incredible that he's already hit that 100-point mark already in this year, having missed 2 races. I think that Checo feels disappointed that it's worked out this way, but he's trying to say the right things at the moment. He's gutted that he's probably going to be spending next year not only on the sidelines for Formula One, but probably motorsport as a whole. It's so late in the day now to be trying to send the deal. He holds that little bit of hope that he can get in at Red Bull, but I think it's going to be difficult. So now all he can do is really smash it in these last few races and try and secure 4th in the Drivers' Championship.
Imagine that, but imagine trying to explain to somebody next season why the guy who finished 4th in the Drivers' Championship this year isn't in Formula One. How do you do that?
It's difficult, but it's what stands Formula One apart from many other sport, really. It's not just about ability, is it? It's about getting the whole package together. It's about circumstance. It's about convincing people that you deserve a seat. And unfortunately, so many seats were settled so early on. Checo didn't really have many people he could try and convince. There are words. I won't use them. On to AlphaTauri, and these guys, I had a great time talking to these boys today. What did you make of what they were talking about today? So at the end of Turkey, Pierre was talking about being embarrassed by the performance that they had over there, and to be honest, given the trajectory they've had, it was quite embarrassing. They just were lost all weekend. I think they're full of hope here this weekend for the final 3 races, that AlphaTauri, even though they've dropped off a little bit from Ferrari, can have a real strong end to the season. Pierre's flying, and he's so happy and he's so positive. And I think that is really having an impact on his driving ability.
I think even Danny's loving it at the moment as well. He told me earlier today that he's just loved this second half of the season. He's high on confidence, even though he knows he's probably not coming back next year. He's driving, without a care in the world. You put him and Pierre together, a team that is high on confidence as well. They've been smashing it since the first weekend in Austria, I think, and one of the most sort of consistently impressive teams in the paddock. If it wasn't for that 3rd and 4th place with Ferrari last time out in Turkey, they'd still very much be on the same level as Ferrari. As it is, they've dropped out of that battle with Ferrari, and they're finding themselves up in that fight for 3rd. But Pierre today talking about the future, about how this year, actually off the back of last year and their 2 podiums, into this year, how the team is just levelling up season on season, weekend on weekend. And when the budget cap comes in 22 and the new regs come in, they want to be there, they want to be punching, they want to be top of the midfield.
Earlier this year, Christian Horner referred to them as the sister team, not the junior team. And I feel like that really is a step up just in terms of mentality for these guys. Because just even saying those words, sister, just means we almost believe that you can make that step up. And we've seen year on year that those guys, with the resources they had, can deliver. And so there's no reason that if now that ceiling's been moved up slightly higher, they can't then go up and push up against it.
Renault talking about ceiling being raised. Beginning of the year, disappointing, not where they thought they were going to be, not where we thought they were going to be after pre-season testing, and yet from Silverstone onwards, the steps that they've taken to find themselves now in that battle for 3rd place. Daniel Ricciardo 1 point behind Charles Leclerc in the Drivers' Championship, and the pair of them just a couple of points off Checo for 4th in the Drivers' standings, really shows how far they've come.
I think we should remove Turkey from the history books in terms of the form that Renault have had. I think that was just a blip. The conditions just didn't suit them. I think they're going to be back on it this weekend. I think moving across these final few races in the warm weather, I think Renault are really going to come at it. And for me, they're the ones who are probably best set to grab P3 in the Constructors.
I find Esteban's demeanour this year quite an interesting one. I asked him earlier today if he needed a bit more spark in his fight with his teammate, because whether it's been in junior Formula or whether it was in Formula One down at Racing Point, he's always had somebody to kind of hate. He's always had that really angsty sort of confrontational relationship, either with his teammate or who he was fighting in a championship. And with Daniel doesn't have that, and I almost felt like, and he said, oh, no, it's not so much that, but then his answer didn't properly kind of get past that. I don't know, I just think he maybe needs a bit of confrontation to draw the most out of it.
Yeah, and I think he also just needs a result, because the thing is, the unreliability has fallen on his side of the garage, and I think he stayed actually quite perky considering how awful it's been. He just needs one good weekend, I think, and then that will kind of G him up. He's just been unfortunate. He's driving against a Daniel Ricciardo who's been better than he's ever been.
And we talk about the change in fortunes for him. Well, what about the change in fortunes for the guys down here at McLaren? You say Esteban just needs one good race.
Yes.
Carlos, Monza was having that similar run of bad form, that one great race, turned it all for him, but then Lando got all of the bad luck, seemingly. It's only really been the last two races where McLaren have been firing both guns in the same direction. Yeah,
it's been that topsy-turvy season. They've managed to score at every race, but not always with both cars.
Yeah.
I think what's really encouraging is, at the moment, like you said, Carlos is on that upward trajectory. He's having a phenomenal end to the season. He's now in that fight, really, that outside fight to get P4 in the Drivers' Championship. You've got Lando, who's had a tougher time, but he's still picking up the results, still scraping the results. And I think this is a point in the year, and also look back on his career, where he'll look back and he'll think, right, this has really helped me kick on.
Yeah, absolutely. He released something very positive this week about mental health, about how he'd really struggled in his rookie season and put a lot on his shoulders, and how he'd learnt this year to turn those negatives into motivation, into positivity. And in these COVID times, I think that's something, if folks haven't read, that they could do really well to read. It's a very open, very honest appraisal of himself.
It's a very brave thing to do for Lando, for someone who's only 21. He's only just turned 21. I know that when I was 21, I don't think that's the kind of thing I would be able to articulate in the way that he's done. And it's very good that he's been able to say how difficult it has been, but also makes his achievements in Formula One ever the more impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. McLaren's saying, well, Carlos saying today, and Lando both actually saying third place doesn't really matter to them. If they get it, it's nice to have, but they're more proud of the steps that the team has taken this season. So, as you were saying, I think, maybe the car is not at the same level as the Renault or the Racing Point potentially at the moment. So, maybe they're kind of just putting a dampener on it early. Red Bull Racing, we want to talk about them very, very quickly. I asked Max today, P2 in the championship, you can still take it from Valtteri. Long and the short of it, he doesn't care.
No, I got that.
He's not bothered.
Impression of the written presser as well. He wasn't that bothered about it, was he?
He's not. He's absolutely not bothered about it. Championship or bust, basically, for Max. For Alex, I think probably the more relaxed I've seen him over the last few races.
I think that his demeanour today was much more positive. He felt much better about things. His confidence looked a bit higher. Just the way that he was talking, not only about his future, but the way that the car's behaving and how he's feeling about things. He says his focus is the last three races. There's no plan B, it's just plan A for him, and he wants to deliver in these three races. And if he can do that, then I think he didn't exactly say this, but I think if he can do that, he'll keep his seat.
Well, you seemingly thought from Turkey onwards that it's pretty much Alex or bust for them now.
I just can't see anyone else apart from Alex being in that car and in that seat next year. I think that he's done enough to convince them. Especially that turning point in Turkey. He led that racing lap. He showed the potential. He just felt over the weekend that he felt much more confident about the car. I think he's done enough then to show that he needs to stay.
Interesting. Don't necessarily agree. Ferrari, both drivers today full of confidence. Seb, great to see him buzzing after that podium. Boy, he needed that.
I tell you what, it's amazing, and we were saying earlier, what a result does for you.
Yeah.
It's really perked him up, and I felt bad for Seb this year because his head dropped. He's always trying to put a positive spin on things, but when we talk to him in the pen or in the written media, he's trying to put a positive spin on it, but you haven't quite believed him because you know he's been struggling. But I think now that he's got the impetus to really come into these final 3 races, I think Ferrari on the up, he's definitely much more comfortable with the car, and I think he could have a very strong end to the year.
Charles, very mindful of the fact that it's just as easy to have a bad weekend as it is to have a good weekend, not putting too much in that. But as we were sort of saying with Lando as well, another guy who puts a lot on his shoulders, who earlier in his career was very critical of himself, very critical in Turkey of the mistake that he made, but he told me today that by dinner time he'd already put it behind him.
Amazing. It's another example, isn't it, a wise head on young shoulders. I think the way that he's able to compartmentalise it in that way shows how far he's come since he's entered Formula 1.
One other fun thing today, Seb said he was very disappointed with his podium in Turkey because they didn't have champagne. So he said, so I'm hoping that I get to taste the champagne again soon. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but they don't have it here or in Abu Dhabi either. And he was just like, oh man, why did you tell me that? I was like, yeah, but you were on the podium next to the Racing Point guy, so promise that you can actually taste it with Racing Point next year. And he was very positive about the steps that Racing Point have taken, as they will be Aston Martin next year. And you know, I think he's really looking forward to getting that going.
I think it's a real boost actually for Aston Martin for them to get a Seb who's hopefully going to be a bit more on the up. I think it would have been really tough for them over the winter and into the early part of next season to have a Seb who's really been beaten and bruised at Ferrari. Totally. So I think it's exciting for him, but also exciting for them as well.
Now we will finish with Mercedes, as we tend to do. Lewis Hamilton, of course, now a 7-time Formula 1 world champion. How did you find him today?
I thought he's in a great mood, considering since we left him in Turkey, he's done every media under the sun. He's done a lot of Zoom interviews, really speaking very eloquently about a whole range of topics. Here today, I thought he was in a really nice mood.
He was great. I said, what have the last 10 days been like for a 7-time world champion? He said, not as glamorous as you think. And he said, it's just reflective of 2020. He spent his whole time on Zoom calls, being by himself with Roscoe. He managed to see his dad, but he still hasn't seen the majority of his family, hasn't seen his mum. And I said to him, you know, look, we're coming into a Christmas where people aren't going to see their families. And he said, yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's 7-time world championship. I'm very grateful, but I'm also very appreciative that people are having a really hard time at the moment. And just once again, being mindful and really kind of giving a voice to other people that are going through hard times. And he's become this, he's really grown into this place as a focal point and a great figure for Formula 1.
I think he just gets it. He gets that there's a bigger picture, that Formula 1 isn't the be all or end all. Of course he wants to win. Of course he wants to win the titles. But I think, like you said, when you talk about him being growing, he sees everything in a wider lens now. And I think that's really, really positive for the sport. It's positive for him as a person. Positive for everyone else up and down this grid.
Yeah, and he uses that place to get people to think and debate and discuss and rethink as well. I know he's done that for me this year, certainly, in a number of ways. We, of course, look at Mercedes and Lewis, the champions for this year. That's all tied up. There are championships to be tied up, one of which can be done this weekend. Formula 2, Mick Schumacher can become Formula 2 champion this weekend.
Exciting, because if everything goes to plan, or even if it doesn't, he's going to be in Formula 1 next year. so I think we were talking about how impressive it is to get a bounce of results to really kick on next year. If he can win the F2 title this year, that's the perfect platform that he needs to come into Formula 1 and hopefully live up to the name and to the expectation that's placed on his shoulders.
His F2 season, very much like his F3 and F4 seasons before it, or should I say campaigns. First year bed himself in, second year get the swing of it in the first half of the year and then smash the second half of the season. It's what he did in F4, it's what he did in F3, it's what he's doing in F2. Will be amazing to see what Mick Schumacher can do if indeed he takes the title. Maybe that's what Haas are waiting for. Mick wins the title and announce him as F2 champion Mick Schumacher to join Formula 1 with Haas.
I mean, as if we needed it to be a bigger story, that would be the icing on the cake, wouldn't it? To have a Schumacher back in Formula 1 is quite an incredible thing.
It would be amazing. That is pretty much it then from this little paddock. Well, what are you expecting from the weekend?
I'm expecting a hot race, obviously. I think what we're going to see is some really exciting racing. That's what I love about the layout here. It encourages overtaking, it encourages good racing. We've been treated to that in abundance of late, but I think we're going to get some more of it this weekend.
Interestingly, talking to the guys at Mercedes, they said the one thing that they think is going to show up this weekend is that we've been to a number of tracks that Formula One hasn't been visiting for either for a long time or for the first time this year, such as Mugello and Imola and Portimao and then Istanbul. This is the first track in a long time that Formula One has visited for a Grand Prix that it knows, that it's used to coming to, and we're really going to see how much the field has closed together over those races, how much Red Bull have pulled the gap back to Mercedes. Are Ferrari seriously back in the mix? Renault, Racing Point, McLaren, all of those guys together. Honestly, I think we've got a really thrilling final 3 races to come for us. But for now, that's all the time that we've got, I'm afraid. Looking forward to it. Tip for the win?
Can't wait. I'm going to Lewis. I think he wants to finish with 3 wins in a row.
Every weekend, mate. Every weekend. Cool stuff. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We will see you later. But from Lawrence, from me, we'll see you next time.